The name for it, the Road Trilogy, was coined by an American critic who named it that, and then it stuck. I didn't intend it as a trilogy. And I only realized in hindsight, yes, there is something about it. 3 films on the road, one after another. And the first grain was, in fact, in Goldie's Anxiety. Already a little bit in Summer in the City, but especially in Goldie's Anxiety, there is one section of the film where the goalkeeper leaves from Vienna and travels out to the border. At the time, Yugoslavia still existed. And that little journey was my favorite part of the shoot. And that encouraged me then later to turn that principle of shooting on the road into a whole film, which was Alice in the Cities. It encouraged us to do Wrong Move, which again was Peter Handke's script. And then what I thought was the most courageous and most radical of all these road films was Kings of the Road. It was more radical than the other 2 because it was totally unscripted. Alice had been halfly scripted. Wrong Move had been scripted by Peter Handke, and I followed the script pretty adamantly. And Kings of the Road then was the pure form of a road movie. It had no script whatsoever. And that was what I had secretly been dreaming of as the true form of these road movies. The Road Trilogy was certainly only possible and owes a lot to the handful of people who did these films with me. And if you look at the credit sequences of these films, you're amazed how little people worked on these. Sometimes they all fit on one card. The freedom that we developed in these few films is also based on the freedom we gave each other and we had with each other, and on the trust we had in each other. And I have to first of all mention Robbie Muller. Robbie I met when he was still camera assistant. He was camera assistant to a great Dutch DOP, and they shot a fictional film in Munich. That was in 1968. The story was centered about a commune of leftist revolutionaries, and as I had very long hair, I became one of those. It was a small part with dialogue, so I played in that film. I played a revolutionary, and I had to learn all these stupid slogans and stuff. And doing that film for 3 or 4 days of shooting, I realized the assistant behind the camera was damn cool. Robbie was the coolest camera assistant I've ever seen. He was able to roll a cigarette in his pocket in one hand while focusing, while doing the focusing, while they were shooting, and I watched that. And I got to talk to him and found out that he was also thinking of eventually starting to be a DOP, and I invited him right away to shoot my next and first student film in 35mm. I had 3 days of shooting, and I hired Robbie off the spot there. I was sure that he could handle anything, because with that uncanny ability of multitasking, of focusing, being very concentrated, but at the same time rolling a cigarette was too good to be true, so he had to be a great DOP. And Robbie then shot my film, and it was the first time I had a DOP. Until then, I had shot all my films myself. And we hit it off really well. He was the first guy who actually set lights in my film and operated the camera much better than I ever did. And Robbie was a dream come true. We did the next 10 years every film together. An important part of the equation was Peter Pschigota, the editor, who I met soon after Robbie. When I did my graduation from Summer in the City, I edited it myself. I had so far edited all my films myself, and it was too long. It was 2.5 hours, and they said at the school, but Wim, you're using every single second you've shot. You have to cut off things. And I said, I can't cut off anything. I like it all. And word got out, Wim is looking for an editor. And then this kid came into the school one day and said, I'm an editor, I can handle it. And he was very self-confident. And I sat down with him and I looked over his shoulder and we thought about each of the cuts he suggested, and we took half an hour off together. And he was good and I liked him, and he had a good taste in music, and we started going out at night, and he was a cool cat. And only later I found out that was the first film he ever cut. And Peter then edited my films for the next 30 years. Then there is Martin Müller, who did the sound on all these films. Also important, because at the time it was unusual that you would shoot with direct sound. Martin Müller was good on the road and could handle it all on his own. We never had a boom person, so we were a tiny little crew, and these were the three core people. Rüdiger, of course, because I made all these movies with him, he did sort of become my alter ego. He calls himself my alter ego. And I sometimes, when I was angry at him, I called him mein altes Ego. There was a little bit of a relation that Philip Winter became a guy who I knew a lot about and who I invested a lot in different forms and shapes, because in each film he's almost a little bit of a different guy, and he changes professions, and he has all sorts of professions in the course of these 6 or 7 films we did. When Rüdiger plays Philip Winter, he became a detective and a sound engineer and a writer, and he did all sorts of things.
The representative of the Australian embassy is requested to go to room B.
I'm not a talker. Now I'm doing an interview. And you force me to talk, but I'm not so much of a talker. And much less when I was a young filmmaker. I like to write, and I wrote about movies, but I rarely talked about them. I was quite a silent character. So, and I didn't really think, I mean, my favorite character in all my movies was Travis in Paris, Texas. Catatonic and non-speaking as he was, I loved him. And in Alice in the Cities, the relation between Philip Winter and the little girl there, she was the talking part, and she had the guts, and he was a little bit grumpy and didn't really like the company of this little girl. So they were silent for a while, and then it finally also breaks up, and they learn how to talk to each other. Peter is my oldest friend. I met him when I was still in high school. I was 19. The first play of Peter's was performed on stage in my hometown of Oberhausen. And he was an unknown, completely, totally unknown young writer. Peter himself was only 22. It was called Selbstbezichtigung, so it's called accusing yourself. The actors were insulting each other and accusing each others of all sorts of things. And that was a play that like nobody had ever seen before. And that play was sort of a little scandal, a local scandal, and I went, and I was still, and I was a smart ass, and Peter had a public discussion after the play, and I was the guy who asked him all the questions, and he smiled at some of these questions because they were cocky and stupid. But he remembered me, and a few months later I met him by chance in Düsseldorf in the streets, and he remembered the kid who asked all these questions. We went to see a movie together, and then he had just moved there. I helped him. I built shelves for his apartment because I was good at that, and I painted some of it, and we became friends and went to see several films, and that's where our friendship started. We met again when I was studying in Munich, and we made a short film together, 3 American LPs. It's the first music film I made. Then later, when I finished film school and had done my graduation film, and like all of my colleagues, we set out in the street not knowing what to do now that we had graduated, because the industry in Germany was not at all ready to deal with us. That was the very first film school in Germany, and the first people left the film school. And it was right after '68, and of course these were all political students involved, including me, and nobody really had anything, wanted to have anything to do with us. And Peter just had his first and, well, bestseller, you can say, because The Goalie's Anxiety at the Penalty Kick really sold well and was very popular. And seeing my situation of a hopeless career after film school, I said, why don't you take my novel? It's popular and you should make a movie of it. And he basically gave it to me, and I wrote a script, not quite knowing how to do that, but I wrote a script after it, and miraculously I got it financed, and that was I was the only one of my colleagues from film school who actually made a film the year afterwards. And it was strictly due to the fact that Peter had given me his novel. So I owe Peter really the beginning of my professional career. And of course we went on, and we became long and solid friends ever since, and continued to work together with Wings of Desire. I produced his The Left-Handed Woman, which is one of my favorite films. So we go back exactly 50 years. I always looked at Scarlet Letter as a huge failure, and the only fun scene was a little extra scene between Rüdiger Vogler, who had a tiny part in it as a sailor because he had already played in Goalie's Anxiety, where he played the village idiot, and I liked him. And he begged to be in that movie too. I gave him a little part of a sailor. Hester's daughter Pearl was cast by Jella. It was a tiny little part. She only had a few days of shooting. The only improvised scene in the entire film was the sailor and the little girl. And they had fun. It lasted 10 seconds. And I enjoyed myself in that complete depression of making a movie that you didn't believe anymore, and you didn't believe in the locations, you didn't believe in the story, you didn't believe in any of the actors anymore. That little scene was a highlight, and I said, this is going to be my saving grace, and whatever I do next, I'm going to do it with these two. And in the end, it turned out to be these two. When I started to look for Alice, I knew Jella already. She was a little young for the part, she was just 7, but she had a great understanding of filmmaking. She loved to say cut. I allowed her to say cut. She had a great understanding of what a scene would be about, but she wouldn't want to learn the dialogue. She told me, Wim, if I learn the dialogue, it's not going to come out true. But if I say something that means the same that what you wrote, then the scene is true.
Du bist froh, wenn du los bist, was?
Sei nicht so zickig.
Quite often actors are scared of children. Actors are scared to deal with children and to act with children because they steal the show. And you have to react, and you cannot very often do what you intend to do, but you have to go along. And Rüdiger was very gracious with little Jella and liked her, and Jella always got to the point of the scene, even if it was in her own words. I liked the relation with Peter and Amina, his first daughter, and the way they talk with each other. And it was the only father-daughter relation that I really knew. And she really grew up with her dad. And I very much liked her cockiness and the way she, almost like an adult, insulted him and stood up for her rights, and she was very self-confident. The idea had been there to make a journey of a man who went to America and tried to write about America and only managed to take pictures. That was there, but to have him all alone seemed a little miserable. And then sort of a sudden the idea of this girl and this father-daughter relationship, vaguely this daughter that he didn't like to have, it was more like a chance encounter. And that eventually came together in a first draft of a suggestion for a film. We didn't follow that script very much. And I did rewrite it considerably also after I saw Paper Moon. I saw Bogdanovich's films a few weeks before we were going to start shooting in a press screening in New York. I was completely shattered because it's a story of a father traveling with his daughter, and it was remarkably like the script I just finished. It was so much like the script that I finished that right after the screening I called the production company in Munich and called it off. I said, we can't make the movie anymore, it's just been made. I called it off. I really seriously canceled it. And I still had a ticket to go to, for the first time in my life, to the West Coast, because I'd been invited by the Pacific Film Archives and to show my first 3 films there, the ones before Alice. So I flew there, showed these 3 films, and then in San Francisco or in Berkeley, and then decided to travel to Los Angeles because I'd been there for the first time in California. I thought it was stupid not to see Los Angeles, so I took a car and drove to Los Angeles, and I remembered I had a phone number. I had done an interview with Sam Fuller in Cologne when he was shooting Dead Pigeon, and I had that phone number. It was the only phone number I had in Los Angeles, and I called Sam Fuller, and he was so gentle and remembered me, the kid who had done this interview with him, and invited me to breakfast. And I went to his place, and breakfast started at 10 and went until 8 in the evening. And we talked all day. Well, Sam talked all day, and I listened all day, but in between he said, "You seem depressed, what's up?" And I said, "Well, I've just canceled a movie." And I would have loved to do it, but it's stupid, but I just had to cancel it. And he was very upset. You have a financed movie that you cancel? Are you out of your mind? You have to do it. Tell me the story, and why do you cancel it? And I said, well, I just seen Peter Bogdanovich, Paper Moon. He said, I know the film. I've helped Peter edit it. So what is your story? And I gave him the first 2 lines of my script, and he interrupted me and said, bullshit, change it. And then he suggested, all day long, suggested alternatives, how I could very quickly, in one night, rewrite the damn script and maybe use only the opening and then take it somewhere else. And at the end of that day, I called the production company again. I said, we're doing it after all. Sam had convinced me that it was a sin to leave a movie that was financed. In the end, we totally forgot that script that I had then rewritten. And the entire ending has nothing to do with whatever we ever scripted. From Amsterdam on, we were on a totally improvised movie. I wanted to shoot in that street because the hanging train was driving through, and I liked that ice cream parlor, and it had a nice jukebox. And the idea was to let the song On the Road Again appear in the film because it had accompanied us during the entire shoot. We had always listened to it in the cars. It was our theme song, so to speak, On the Road Again. So it had to somehow appear. And then I timed it, how long is the song? And I had the idea to sit this little boy next to the jukebox. He was a friend of a musician I knew. His father was a guitarist. The scene is relatively conceptual because it had a structure. The structure was how long is the song, and if he starts singing it, and if he is the point of view of Jella, and if every now and then, and even Rüdiger, they look at him, and so that the song and the jukebox are the Greek chorus of that scene, and the scene has to be finished when the song is finished. We rehearsed the scene quite solidly, and then the scene wasn't long enough for the song, so in the last second I invented Rüdiger going to the John in between to gain some more time. And that enabled us to time his time out in the scene, and this time he spent on the toilet enabled us to really get the scene to exactly the length of the song. It was a scene I was sort of scared of because they were going to break up, my favorite couple. It could be a droopy scene, and I didn't want it to be dramatic. I wanted to remain laconic. And then the idea that it would have a complete counterpart, and that it would have something playing completely against it. And then, of course, On the Road Again saved us. I mean, the climate of the song and what it's about, and the lightness of it, and the driving beat of it, it just enabled my two actors to go through this dramatic scene and survive graciously. There's a scene in the beginning. You See Me by a jukebox playing Psychotic Reaction by Count 5. That we recorded was actually in that jukebox. And we shot the film in sync sound, so sometimes the soundtrack was married to whatever was playing on the radio. Music was also always part of my imaginary and the creative impulse also in the writing, but also in the shooting. The shooting time is just 10% of your day when you're on the road, and 90% you're driving, or you're thinking about what is the next scene going to be and what can it be. And of course, if you're driving and if you're on the road, and we traveled every day in all of these movies, we're on the road every day, you listen to a lot of music in the car. And for Kings of the Road, we had this fabulous traveling jukebox. So we had music with us all the time. The music players of the jukeboxes were tools in these films. Already in Goldie's Anxiety, I counted when we restored the films, there's 12 shots of jukeboxes in the film, of all sorts of jukeboxes. I love these machines, and at some moment I called them the life-saving machines. And that echoes the quote, the Lou Reed quote, her life was saved by rock and roll. One of the discoveries of the form, the road movie, was not only that you could travel and work and make a film at the same time and improvise it, but that rock and roll could also be, in the true sense of the word, a driving force. That was my generation that had reinvented rock and roll in England by electrifying country blues. And all these people I admired, the Velvets in America, or the Pretty Things, and the Kings, and Van Morrison, they're all exactly my age. A year later, a year earlier, they're all born in the mid-40s. They're all art students like myself. And they lived something that made me think that I had a right to do the very same. And I wasn't a singer, and I didn't play guitar, but my guitar was the camera, and they were the best allies for that sort of adventure. Alice in the Cities was made on shoestrings. We really had no money at all. But because we were this tiny crew of 8 people traveling, we managed to shoot it in 4 weeks, I think. And at the end, there was no money left for a score. And we were at the very last stage of editing, Peter Pschigota and I. And Peter said, I can't help it, but every now and then I feel you need some music. And I said, Peter, we can't afford any music, you know that. And he said, but we still need it. We need one leitmotif. We need one little piece of music that should appear in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. You need it. And I said, what do I do? And Peter said, well, I know these guys. I know these guys in Cologne, Cannes. And I knew Cannes as well because I had seen a concert or two of this. And Peter had made a music film with them. Peter had himself shot and edited a film that was called the Cannes movie. So Peter says, I know them, and I know if we talk to them, they can make some music for us. They're fast. I said, Peter, we have no money. And then Peter said, let me call them. And he called Irmin Schmidt. And Irmin said, oh, it's fine, we're just in the studio, and we're finishing tonight, but when we're finished, if you come, we can record something for you. And Peter said, let's go. So we got into the car. We drove to Cologne 6 hours and arrived there at midnight. And they had just finished their last recording session on that album. And they were all wasted. And all of a sudden, oh yeah, these guys, they needed some music. And Irmin had pity on me, and he went and talked to Michael, their guitarist. And he said, I can handle it. And he laid down a guitar track, very simple, some notes. And I liked what I heard. It had a strange mood, and it was flowing nicely. And then I thought, but that cannot be what we're going home with, just one guitar picking. I could have done that with anybody. And then Irmin saw my disappointment and said, yes, it's not finished yet. And he sat down on the keyboards. He played some strange sounding violins. It was like all of a sudden like a big string orchestra behind, and of course it sounded weird because it was clearly a computer and samples. But all of a sudden there was this breath and there was this big score, and the guitar and his keyboard was it then. And he said, well, that's it. And it was already mixed as he was recording it. So he came out happily and had this tape and said, this is it. It took 20 minutes. It was one track of a guitar and one track of synthesizer. We drove back that night, and in the morning came back to the editing. We were completely wasted. We had driven 6 hours back, and in the morning laid on pieces of that mix and used it 4 or 5 times all through the film. And that afternoon we did the main mix of the film. With the music we had miraculously recorded with Cannes the night before.
Was machst du in München?
Ich schreibe diese Geschichte zu Ende.
Deine Krickelei?
Und du? Was machst du?
The plan with Peter Handke was to make a film based on Wilhelm Meister's apprenticeship, or apprentice years in Germany. And for some reason, I was busy, Scarlet Letter, I don't know, God knows what, busy. And we had the plan for a couple of years already, Peter and I. And eventually Peter said, oh, we'll never get to doing it. I'm just going to write it. A few weeks later, I had a first draft of a script that Peter had written completely on his own. Strange reading it because I knew the Goethe novel quite well. The Goethe novel is all over the place. It's a difficult one. It's a hard read. It has different characters and you never really know where it's going. It's more of a feeling than a novel. So and Peter really wrote an antithesis to Goethe. And that's why he called it Wrong Move. He used the same characters, or sometimes he combined characters into one, and everything goes berserk in his story. Everything goes wrong.
When my luck is down.
The young man who travels in order to get to know the world and become a writer, he realizes he's still the same in the end, and traveling didn't enlarge his horizon, and he didn't become a better human being, and he fucked it up, basically. And he's very angry at himself and at the world, because he was hoping so much that this journey and leaving home and his mother was going to get him somewhere. It didn't get him anywhere. It's a journey across Germany from north to south. And it's a strange, aimless journey. It's a sort of desperate journey through a kind of desperate country. Peter never came to the set. I respected each of the lines Peter had written, and I didn't really change a single word, other than in the film before Alice and after Kings, where we really improvised a lot. We really stuck to the lines because I thought they were good. It was great to work with dialogue instead of coming up with it. So I really had the actors study it and by heart and deliver the lines as Peter had written them. But what I changed entirely was the route. The locations from that little town in the north up to the Zugspitze were of my own choice. And although Peter had suggested a few things, he suggested Frankfurt in the middle of the film because Frankfurt was already a banking town. It was already sort of a very icy, very cold heart of Germany. So, and the Rhine I had chosen because I had grown up there. So I had an itinerary and I had what I liked, a great dialogue. I had strange characters. Wilhelm was a stubborn young man. But not open. He's not like the other appearances of Rüdiger's in other films. He was not a gentle character. He was tough on others and himself. He was different. He was too hard and wanted too much to become somebody, and that's what made it impossible for him to go anywhere, become gentle or generous, or he's hard.
Und du, Mignon?
Actually, that is the one character from Goethe that Peter did keep. That character exists in the Goethe novel. She is a young girl. She's very much in love with Wilhelm Meister. She follows him. She's heartbroken when he gets married. She kills herself. It's almost the one character he respected most in the Goethe novel. She's mysterious. She's totally mysterious in the film. One of the many facets of the characters that Peter took from the Goethe universe and sort of all threw them into 20th century Germany, exposed them into this sort of hopeless land that the film, after all, goes through. The old singer appears in Goethe, but Peter turned him into this, well, he gave him this Nazi past. You see a few hints. You see the old man react to the conductor, and later on he says in the camp that he worked, he was his adjutant. There's a few hints at a horrible past. And then also Wilhelm guesses most of it. And he's very angry at the man. Even in his anger, he isn't radical enough. He isn't radical enough to push him into the water. Like with his writing, he doesn't have enough guts. The form of the film tries to do justice to Goethe. The form of the film tries to be rewarding. In the form and its language, the film pretends to be what the characters cannot deal with. In its form, it's instructive. It has a breadth, and it has a certain gentleness. My hope was that we can walk up this entire hill with these characters in different constellations that would all talk to each other, and it would be one long move, and in a way the only good move in the film. That walk up the hill is full of understanding. They really communicate, and there's a gentleness about it. In the back you see the little town where my mother grew up. I knew these hills really well. We didn't have Steadicam. It wasn't invented yet. There was no way to lay tracks. We didn't have tracks. So we actually shoved this little car all the way up the hill. The little crew that we were, I shoved as well. We pushed and pushed and pushed. We did multiple takes, and we always rolled the car back, and we pushed it back. And the sheer physical effort made the beauty of the scene. The sheer physical effort to push a car uphill for days. And then, of course, we had great sunlight, and the sun burst through, and you see this very romantic Rhine Valley. It was another image of Germany to the scenes before and afterwards. It was a much more gentle and kind feeling. And that is the core of the film, that scene. That was the good move. The rest of the film was the wrong move. Sleep is a strange area of life that is kept out of most movies. Already in Goldie's Anxiety, there's several dreaming sequences. I'm very attractive to sleeping characters. And they're at their most innocent and vulnerable, but very much there. Watching a sleeping person can also be a very tender act. Sleep is almost a holy region of life. If you look at Kings of the World, I don't think you think there was no script at all. It has a structure, and it is shot like a feature film, not like a documentary. And that courage to use a documentary approach in terms of traveling and shooting, but shoot it like a real movie. That I think I got from Nicholas Ray and Lusty Men. The film like Lusty Men that looks so rock solidly shot and such, it's so constructed, if you want, and to realize that even that was largely improvised was very encouraging. Kings of the Road, there was no map except for the map of Germany, where we drew all the places that still had a cinema. And otherwise, there was no dramatic map. I suggested dialogue, the actors did something with it, we improvised, and in the end, when we shot, we knew vaguely what the scene was about. We didn't so much improvise in front of camera. Well, sometimes we did. Some of the shots were completely invented in front of the camera, but a lot of the dialogue we did a couple of times before. And the key dialogue of the film is the big, long night that the two men spend in this little observation point of the American army overlooking the wall that stretches out in front of them, the wall that divided the two Germanys. That we shot actually twice.
Du feiger Sack. Du hast vor dir selbst Angst. Auf die Art bringst du sie noch wirklich um. Die kommt zurecht.
Du kennst sie auch gar nicht.
Aber ich kenne dich.
We shot that entire scene improvised, totally improvised, and the two actors were getting drunk in the story, and they both felt the only way to shoot it, improvised, was to get drunk. So we shot a whole night, and they were completely pissed by the end of the night, and it was a disaster. We didn't get the scene because they were too drunk. They got too angry at each other. It didn't have a form. They started to slur their language. It was a bloody disaster. Robbie also drank, so the camera was also drunk. The next day we said, no, that is not a scene, we have to do it again. But at least now we knew how to do it. The next night we shot it all over again, but we put tea into the whiskey bottles. And because they had done it once drunk, they remembered what not to do. And it became a halfway decent scene. And by then we had also a feeling what the things were that could be said.
I've got a woman, mean as she can be.
Die Amis haben unser Unterrüstzeug kolonialisiert.
I think I have suggested that. I suggested that in the talks we had about what could come out in the scene, and as both of these guys passed their childhood and post-war Germany in the 50s and 60s, and both had similar experiences like myself. The movies were American, a lot of the literature we'd grown up, a lot of the music, the comic strips. We shared these colonized cultural phenomena, and so, of course, Hans, the intellectual of the two, caught up on the line and proudly used it. And it hardly survived the editing process because Peter didn't like the line. He said it throws us out. It's a comment on it's too generalized, and it feels like it doesn't belong. Peter always wanted to take out the line, and I fought for my stupid line. And it became, I don't know, everybody remembers that one. They talk a lot in the film, the guys, and everybody only remembers that one line.
Muss mal pinkeln.
The history of this scene is really between Peter Pschigota, my editor, and myself. When we shot it, it was an accident. That was the only time in Kings of the Road that I did a scene. Rüdiger Vogler walks out into this dune and takes in peace, like we told him to, and he comes back, and the scene was finished. And then Robbie comes to me and says, "I'm very sorry, but we have a huge hair in the gate. I think the scene is not usable." So I said to Rudiger, we have to do it again. And Rudiger said, "I can't do it again, sorry. I took a leak, remember? And now I can just stand there and pretend. But I don't know if that's what you want." I said, "Well, then take a shit." Meaning, I don't care, just pretend. But then we rolled, and he did take a shit. And we were standing there, Robbie and I, looking at each other, and we're going to say, "Cut." He took me seriously, he took a shit. And to our big amazement, he delivered this huge sausage into the white sand, and we just stared in disbelief. And I didn't dare to say cut, because there was something simple and natural to it. And after all, it's one of the most simple things that people do every day. And I felt they had a right to do it, and so we shot it. And then we didn't speak about it, as we were all a little bit embarrassed that we had shot this act. And we forgot about it. And then later on we realized the first take was really unusable. That big hair was there from the beginning. Robbie had been right. So in the editing, then Peter had to use the second take, the shit. And he left it in its entirety in the rough cut. And eventually I said, "Peter, we're going to have to take it out. We can't leave it in." He said, "No, well, I like it. You just don't have the guts to keep it in." "Oh," I said, "you." And we started this fight. And then we took it out anyway. And it became a little bit of a thing between Peter and me, who had the guts to leave it in. Was it me or was it Peter? So Peter eventually, when we first screened the film to a couple of people of the company, he cut it back in. And then the film went to Cannes. And the day before the screening, Gilles Jacob, who was then the assistant to the president of the festival, he became the president the next year. He came to me and said, "Young man, do me a favor. Please take this one scene out. You know what I'm referring to, because I think the film has a chance, and a jury, I think, will like it. But with that scene, you will not have a chance." And I said, "What? I'm not going to cut my movie. I'm not going to take it." I mean, then I had to take a stand and say, no, I can't cut it out. That would have been the last moment I could have done it, but under the circumstances, it was my first film in Cannes, I couldn't take it out. So I stayed in, and of course the film didn't get any award, but it got the Critics Award anyway. And it was still in. And Peter was at the screening, we looked at each other, and we said, "How come this is still in? We always wanted to take it out." And I said, "It's your fault, Peter." And he said, "No, it's your fault." I've seen it 100 times. Each time disturbs me. But at the same time, each time I think, well, it's such a simple act. There's nothing, it's almost clinical the way it's shot with the white sand. And it's such a human thing. And we eat in movies, and we do all sorts of things. And people even make love in movies. And that, I think, is really appalling. But taking a shit is so simple.
my guitar, just like Eddie.
I knew the road. I knew every town. I knew that we're going to hit these white sands. Some of the places we found by accident, like this strange little food stand, which is also a sawn-off truck, that we found by accident. We drove by from one location to another. Tiny crew had 3 cars. I was in the first car with Robbie, and we drove by. We both looked at it, and we continued driving, listening to music. And 10 minutes later, Robbie says, "Why didn't you stop?" And I said, "Yeah, because he didn't say anything." And we looked at each other and said, "We have to go back." Turned around, drove back 10 minutes, and then we spent the rest of the day at this truck stop. But other places I knew the places, and it gave us a strange security that we always knew where we were going to go next. We did shoot for a relatively long time, about 10 weeks, which was one of the longest shoots of my life. And because we spent a lot of time on the road, and each time we had to settle in, and as we were such a small crew, we had the luxury of time. We took another road trip inside the road trip and traveled all the way to the River Rhine, which was insane because we had all our stuff. We were planning this route along the German border, and at some point I felt this route was getting too boring. We had to go somewhere where we hadn't intended to go, and then, to everybody's amazement, we said the movie is now going to travel west and it's going to go to the Rhine. You can do that only if you have everything in 2 cars. If you have to move an entire crew with 10 trucks and stuff, you can never out of a sudden say, "Well, now we're going to leave here and we're going to travel for 500 miles to shoot on the Rhine." Then everybody's going to go berserk. That had never been the plan, and that we surprised ourselves. At some point in their relation between Kamikaze and King of the Road, we felt it was time to go into the history. In the case of Kamikaze, we decided that the all-important character in his life was his father, as he was a writer and a psychologist and dealt with children. Because Hans Sichel, who played the part, is a writer, and his relation with his father was important in his life, we decided to turn the father into a man who wrote and who published a newspaper. It was also in Kamikaze's way of talking. The printed word was important, and the act of printing. And so we found this unbelievable, this beautiful old printing place. We found it in one of the little towns that we came through. It was too good to be true. It was still working. They still published this dinky little newspaper once a week. And I found the perfect actor to be Hans' father. They actually looked similar. He had already played in the Fritz Lang movie when he was a young man. The film does go into a certain form of psychoanalysis, popular psychoanalysis with the 2 characters, and they also auto-analyze each other, and of course that ends up in a fist fight because they feel insulted by the way the other one sees them. So none of that was mapped. Lisa's role was an afterthought. It was eventually that I felt these 2 guys just on their own, dreaming of women and talking about women, and in the end, women couldn't be so completely absent, and even their absence would be strengthened if Rüdiger's character would have this encounter. When they meet, when she gives him that candle, which we also found on this fairground, the candle of the Hitler head, didn't know that existed. We saw it actually being sold there. They happened to have that country fair in the town. We used it I knew the theater. I had liked this little theater a lot, and it was perfect for their encounter and for the night he spends there. So we spent almost a week in that little town with that theater.
Ab 1951, nicht? Ich habe es ja jahrelang nicht mehr betreiben dürfen, nicht? Wegen dem Dritten Reich und so weiter, nicht? Das war ihm so, nicht?
Warum haben Sie es nicht ausüben dürfen?
Na, weil ich Parteimitglied war, nicht? SPD, nicht? Nicht NSPDAT oder wie die geheißen haben, nicht? Die Partei da, nicht? Und dann musste ich prozessieren von 50 bis 51, dass ich mein Kino wieder gekriegt habe, nicht?
The old projectionist was a leftover. He actually happened towards the end of the movie, and we couldn't fit him in. At the end of the movie, he was a stumbling block. This is strictly documentary shoot. We interviewed the old man in his projection booth, and he revealed this amazing story of having played silent movies and of having been part of the orchestra who played music, and his wife, and he told us all these things we didn't even know yet, that the first Sun movies were on discs. I didn't know that. So I liked the interview, and we shot the reverse angle with Rüdiger's character asking the questions. Peter suggested to have it as a prologue, and it's a little bit of a stumbling block in the beginning, and the film only starts right afterwards, but it does set the tone, and it does set the idea that it's about the decline of the movie theater culture.
Ich sehe mich eigentlich zum ersten Mal als jemanden, der eine Zeit hinter sich gebracht hat. Und dass diese Zeit meine Geschichte ist. Das ist ein ganz beruhigendes Gefühl.
I'm not one of these filmmakers who are into inventing the worlds they want to show. I'm rather into representing what I see. Maybe that's why I do more documentaries lately.
I remember at MoMA, I think it was at MoMA, you said calmly but firmly, I'm a German romantic. And that surprised me a little, but in a way it seems undeniable too. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
There's things you regret as soon as you say them. And having said I'm a hopeless German romantic.
Oh, okay. All right, so you remember better than I do. Okay.
I'm a hopeless German romantic. As soon as I said it, I figured I was going to be quoted. And as you said in the audience, you caught on it. But it's kind of true. It's kind of true. The way I was growing up on painting and German literature with that counterculture of American music and American literature, but still in the genes was the Goethe and the romantic German literature and poetry, and there was Caspar David Friedrich as a very strong influence on my culture of images. And because you learn more when you're a kid, I think you can never really shake your first experiences and your first impressions. And my first impressions was paint. The first strong thing in my life was painting. And that left a mark on me. Romantic painting, landscapes. My parents weren't rich, but we had a few cheap prints on the walls, and those were French painters, Dutch painters, Corot. Romantic landscapes, and also Caspar David Friedrich. Cheap prints, but they meant the world to me because it was the only thing of beauty that I knew at the time, because I grew up in a completely destroyed town. Düsseldorf was flattened, and 90% of the city was all rubble. So the only beauty I knew was on these prints. I was on paintings, and I was the only kid who forced his parents to go to the museum because that was the place of great beauty. And all around, well, there was the Rhine River, but that was beautiful, but the city was all. So painting was a huge thing in my life, discovering that there was other worlds and that there was other kind of realities and that beauty existed. And painting really was preceded all my movie experiences and kept a lasting influence on me as a filmmaker.
Just go and see a cinema show in the first row and watch him cry him. Sometimes it's not the same, sometimes it takes a plane too, you know. Maybe he's filled up with pain. Now it's a shame that you don't love him. He likes it.